In the 1850s, a doughface was a northern man with southern beliefs. The term was aptly used to describe Franklin Pierce of New Hampshire. An ardent Jacksonian, Pierce forged his political career in Old Hickory's mold. He would later be called Young Hickory, a testament to the enduring influence of Andrew Jackson. In 1852, a deadlocked Democratic convention nominated the little-known Pierce for president on the 49th ballot. They were boom times in the West. One San Francisco businessman fashioned new heavyweight trousers for gold prospectors and farmers. The trousers were called jeans. The entrepreneur's name, Levi Strauss. During Pierce's presidency, California gold and new railroads spurred continued settlement in Western territories. The spread of slavery remained the most contentious issue of expansion. Illinois Senator Stephen Douglas proposed a bill. It would carve 2 new territories out of Indian lands west of the Missouri River. Leaving questions of slavery to settlers, it was called popular sovereignty. President Pierce approved and signed into law the Kansas-Nebraska Act. Few laws in American history have had such a profound and devastating impact. Pro- and anti-slavery factions flooded Kansas, seeking control. Positions hardened. Violence was at hand. But not limited to Kansas. After delivering an anti-slavery speech, Senator Charles Sumner of Massachusetts was beaten senseless on the floor of the United States Senate. Hopes for a peaceful resolution of slavery were nearly gone. Pierce's stand on slavery ruined his chances for a second term and tainted his place in history.
I think that Pierce's administration is generally regarded as one of the worst precisely because every effort to find some way of confining, restraining, eliminating the issue, which was the issue that would not essentially accept settlement slavery, was demonstrated unworkable in his administration.
In retirement, he reaffirmed his allegiance with Southern slaveholders and harshly criticized Abraham Lincoln during the Civil War. Widowed, forlorn, increasingly unpopular, he turned to drink and died on October 8, 1869, in Concord, New Hampshire.
Franklin Pierce, Democrat, 1853 to 1857, 48 years old, from New Hampshire. Franklin Pierce was practically handed the presidency because he was offensive to no one. He would leave office reviled by all.
Pierce had terrible timing throughout his life. Even this timing of when he got elected president was poor. Everybody called him Handsome Frank. The word that was used often in describing was elegant. Extremely outgoing, very charismatic. Even people who didn't like him felt he was a wonderfully charming, interesting person.
Pierce was well-known man about town, a social and political butterfly of sorts with a penchant for drinking, often to excess.
Being involved in politics meant being in taverns, meant slapping people on the back, buying them a drink, and the drinking culture in America at this time was enormous. I mean, one scholar called it the alcoholic republic.
Whether he was an alcoholic is hard to judge today, but he probably was. There were times in his life, however, when he did not drink and when alcohol did not seem to play an important role in his life, and that includes the time he was president.
By all accounts, Pierce managed to stay sober during his presidency. But some believe he was not emotionally stable because of a terrible personal tragedy he suffered just weeks after his election. Pierce, his wife Jane, and their son Benny were in a train wreck. Pierce and his wife were unscathed, but their 11-year-old son was killed.
The top of his head had literally been taken off. Right in front of his parents, Franklin Pierce grabbed his cloak and threw it over Benny's body. hoping that Jane wouldn't see it, but she did, of course, and that was a terrible tragedy to them.
Pierce and his wife had already lost 2 other children to disease. Benny was their last surviving child.
To have your remaining son, the light of your life, Benny, killed in front of your eyes in a train accident, who could imagine the horror that that would instill in anyone?
Added to Pierce's troubles was the death of his vice president, William Rufus King, 6 weeks after the inauguration. And things were about to get worse. Early in 1854, Pierce received a visit from members of his own party, including Illinois Senator Stephen A. Douglas. Douglas informed Pierce he was sponsoring a bill called the Kansas-Nebraska Act.
The Kansas-Nebraska Act is one of the key moments in all of American political history.
The act was designed to repeal the Missouri Compromise of 1820, which banned slavery in states above the southern border of Missouri. The intent was to let the new territories of Kansas and Nebraska, both north of the boundary, decide for themselves if they wanted slavery or not. Douglas promised to make his presidency a living nightmare if Pierce didn't support the scheme.
The president should have said, no, you're opening a can of worms, a hornet's nest, but no, Pierce is weak, Pierce can be bullied, and Douglas forces him basically to say, okay, the administration will support this.
And so Pierce basically caved into them. And as a consequence, most of the Northern Democrats in the Senate and exactly half of the Northern Democrats in the House supported the bill, and that was just enough to get it through Congress.
Anti-slavery groups in the North just went berserk over this bill. They went ballistic.
Among the outraged was a little-known politician from Illinois, Abraham Lincoln. Lincoln was so angered by the blatant pro-slavery act that he helped create a radical new political party to oppose the expansion of slavery, the Republican Party.
Previously, he talked about slavery now and then, but basically he'd just been a fairly ordinary Whig politician. The Kansas-Nebraska Act brings Lincoln back into politics, and it brings him into politics as a spokesman against the expansion of slavery. It galvanizes Lincoln.
Meanwhile, in the Kansas Territory, anti- and pro-slavery settlers were literally fighting it out. On May 21st, 1856, slavery forces burned the abolitionist stronghold of Lawrence, Kansas, down to the ground.
The whole political situation begins to disintegrate, and Pierce is completely incapable of putting it back together again.
Pierce failed to see his role in the deterioration of the Union. He genuinely thought he had a shot at a second term, but even his own party rejected him. Pierce returned home to New Hampshire, reputation ruined. Several years later, after his wife Jane died, he returned to heavy drinking and lived his remaining years as a recluse, perhaps the saddest legacy of any president.